Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Once again, this is going to be a controversial podcast, but sometimes I think that controversy should replace Allen as my middle name. When I see the fact that the U.S. is supporting Israel and the government run by Bibi Netanyahu, although it certainly is not only Netanyahu, many other Israelis are complicit. I would even say that you could argue that the entire country of Israel, for electing that party, that Likud party, is complicit, in a sense. Not to the same extent as Netanyahu and the heads of other parties that support the current campaign in Gaza, but to an extent, to an extent, to an extent. I must say that there have been many times in my life when I have been literally ashamed to be an American. And this is one of those times. Once again, the US shares the guilt with Israel for sending Israel weapons that it knows that Israel will use to kill innocent civilians in Gaza, that it knows will be used to kill innocent civilians in Lebanon. There's no way around it. It appears that the US literally hates the third world. I can't think of any other explanation. Our use of the policy of Pax Americana to repeatedly overturn governments in Latin America, to repeatedly attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro, to go into Afghanistan, even though the guy who was then running Afghanistan, Mullah Omar, ultimately gave his permission to the US to come in. The US simply ignored it and started its bombing campaign of Afghanistan. The fact that the US, for no reason, based upon complete lies about weapons of mass destruction, went in and started a war with Iraq, came up with this sequence of lies which suggested that somehow Saddam Hussein must have been involved in 9/11. I remember all of it. I remember the fact that the UN only gave the United States permission for its initial assault on Afghanistan. The US and its allies took that as a green light for an extended campaign, which resulted not only in the killing of Saddam Hussein, which if you have the heart for it, you can still find around the internet the video of him being hanged. The problems with Iraq were literally started by the United States. Perhaps some of you don't know this story. The person who was then the American ambassador to Iraq was approached by Saddam Hussein, who asked him, "How would you feel if I went in and invaded Kuwait?" Now, this is the first Iraq invasion, which started it all. Her response: the US has no policy on that issue. It was after that statement that Saddam Hussein went in and invaded Kuwait. Now, I'm sympathetic, of course, to the Kuwaitis. They did not deserve to be invaded by anyone. But by the same token, we, the United States of America, were complicit in what Saddam Hussein did. We, the United States of America, were complicit in the killing of countless civilians in Iraq, in the second Iraq War, and of course in Afghanistan as well. And so it has been throughout the last century and a half. American complicity in the destruction of the third world. And no one seems to care. I was watching a podcast, and I won't mention who was speaking because it's irrelevant. But this person said that it appears as though the US simply does not care about Palestine. Yeah, she is 100% correct. Most Americans don't even think about Palestine. Palestine is not a major American issue. It is not something that Americans care about. The only way that Palestine would become front and center in the US press would be if suddenly Joe Biden started supporting it. And of course, that's not going to happen. Anybody who thinks it will, that's a pipe dream. The US will never, at least of its own will, support Palestine. The US and Israel appeared to be wedded to one another. The US cast the final vote, which established the state of Israel back in the 1940s. And since that time, we have been Israel's most trustworthy ally. It is because of the US that Israel has been permitted to commit all of its war crimes. Whatever the war crimes were that were committed possibly by Bibi Netanyahu, and hopefully he will eventually stand trial for them. Somehow he's managed to escape it. Hopefully that won't always be the case. Whatever the crimes were that he committed, and hopefully if he did commit them, he will be convicted. The US has as much responsibility for those war crimes as Bibi Netanyahu. To escape accountability, Israel, as well as the US and Russia and some other countries, do not belong to the World Court at The Hague. Certainly, the US knows that it has committed atrocious war crimes, as does Israel. Why else would it not join the World Court? It's obvious. There's no debate about it. There's no question. There's no dispute or legitimate dispute. And so this kind of demi-reality, as Roy Bhaskar would have called it, this kind of alienation, disunity, or as he sometimes called it, splitting, which exists. Splitting is a very good word, a literal splitting between the first world and the third world. This kind of splitting which exists is a direct result of US policy. US and NATO, are they different? Administratively, yes. But the US runs NATO. If there were no US, there would be no NATO. When President Donald Trump threatened to pull out of NATO for reasons of his own, which have nothing to do with what I'm talking about here, had he done so, would NATO have survived? I doubt it. Is it possible? I guess it's possible. But how much power would NATO have had without the US? The strongest military and political force in the world. It would not have had hardly any power at all. How much power would Israel have without the US? Likewise, its power would be extraordinarily limited. The only reason why Israel is a major first world country with its own nuclear bombs, which it refuses to officially acknowledge, but which privately it has acknowledged, and which people who work in the Israeli government have acknowledged, is because of the US. The US is the reason, the major reason, for all of the demi-reality, the disunity, the splitting, the alienation, which we see around us in the world today. That's basically what it comes down to. And so in watching these constant videos, which I do, maybe I shouldn't, but in watching these constant videos of what Israel is doing to Gaza, and watching all of these countless commentaries by people on what Israel is doing to Gaza, I must say that it makes me depressed. And that is why I said that I felt that my depression was counterproductive and I needed to balance myself out with Roy Bhaskar's philosophy of meta-reality. But it's hard. It's hard. So ultimately, the solution lies in co-presence. co-presence was really Roy Bhaskar's term for communism. Ultimately, communism, or co-presence, unity, must be established if we are to get beyond the present deterioration, disintegration of the world that we see around us today. And it is not only on the global stage, it is local as well. I see it around me. Here in the Rio Grande Valley, people are broken as well. Demi-reality affects all of us, whether we know it or not. And I think we need to be aware of it. We need to make demi-reality a constant focus of our lives, not in a negative sense to where we dwell on horrible things. That's not going to do anything of any value. But in order to destroy capitalism, which is the ultimate fruit of demi-reality, we need to understand what demi-reality is. And demi-reality is manifested in capitalism. In fact, demi-reality, I would argue, is Roy Bhaskar's explanation for capitalism, or one of the foundations of capitalism, this kind of splitting between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, between the first world and the third world, and countless other splittings as well. But again, that is not the answer. What I am talking about are problems. I used to teach social problems courses before I retired. That was one of the regular courses I taught each semester. It was kind of a depressing course to teach because ultimately you're talking about things that are bad. Occasionally, I mean, I would try to bring in possible solutions or break my classes into groups to come up with possible solutions, but what are those solutions? There really are no solutions that are available to the average person. The average person just sits idly by watching, like they're sitting in an audience watching a play, without any real ability to transform the societies of the world, to transform the capitalist world system into a communist world system, which is, in my view, the goal of co-presence, and which can only, in my view, ultimately be accomplished by the third world, at least initially. At least initially. If there is any remnant of the first world, maybe it can join in, maybe. I am almost entirely certain, I was going to say pretty certain, but it's more than pretty certain. I am almost entirely certain that I will not be around. I'm also not very confident that any of you will be around either. I don't mean to ruin your day, but I say that just because I look at the world and I just don't see any hope. If you are in the third world, on the other hand, and I hope that some of you are who are watching me right now, then maybe you will be here. Maybe you will survive the great unraveling of the capitalist world system. I hope you do. And if you do, I hope that you will begin, most likely on a local level, the process of rebuilding, which initially will involve local communities, I think, and then over a period of centuries, millennia, will expand into the world. That is my hope. There is no guarantee, as I've said many times before. There's no guarantee. The guarantee that we have, I think, right now, again, is that the capitalist world system, as Immanuel Wallerstein very intelligently called it, will be destroyed. How do we know that? Because it's happening right now. It's happening right now. There's no need to predict it. We are simply observers watching it occur. So I don't think that that can be questioned, at least not reasonably. But what the outcome will be, what people will or will not do after that great unraveling of the capitalist world system is completed, is uncertain. We literally don't know. But we can work toward a better world. Even now we can. If you are able, start a podcast like mine. I am fortunate to have a background working in radio broadcasting. I have a degree in journalism that is useful to me in my podcasting. But even if you don't have a degree in journalism, even if like me, you have not worked in radio broadcasting as I have several times as a newscaster, a news writer, a news producer, you can still produce podcasts. Most podcasters have never been broadcast journalists, and yet they do a good job. It is a skill which can be learned, and it is a type of conscientization or critical consciousness and conscience raising that we can all engage in. If not, write articles, especially write articles for the third world media. There are a lot of third world countries that speak English or have English language publications. Write for them if you can. That's something I don't do. Maybe you can do that. I write books, not magazine articles. But that doesn't mean that that is the only way to do things. There are so many opportunities open to us for conscientization. But again, when I look at the world as it exists right now, I must say that my hope in its continuance beyond a very brief time is extraordinarily limited. This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.